Man bought a 50-cent stone mansion. What his dog found inside shocked the whole town. The wind pushed through the empty hills of Maple Hollow, carrying the smell of rain and rust. Ethan Ward parked his old Chevy on the gravel drive and stared at what was now, technically, his home. A 3-story stone mansion that looked like it had clawed its way out of another century. The auction paper said, "Property sold as is, 50 cents. 50 cents for 4 acres, and a house too heavy for the earth to forget." Rex jumped down from the passenger seat, paws landing without sound. The German shepherd's coat caught the grey light, streaked with scars and dust. He had once pulled survivors from collapsed buildings in Afghanistan, a search and rescue legend before the military retired him. Now he stood still, nose lifted, tail rigid. "What's wrong, partner?" Ethan asked quietly. Rex didn't move. His ears pressed back, his eyes fixed on the front door. The place looked abandoned, yet not ruined. Stone walls uncracked, shutters sealed tight, iron handles gleaming through layers of dust. But something about the air felt wrong, like a breath being held too long. Ethan had come here for silence, the kind that might let him rebuild a life after war and after the layoff that followed it. But silence here had weight. He shouldered his duffel and started up the steps. Each board creaked like it was remembering the last person who had crossed it. Rex followed 3 paces behind, reluctant, muscles tense. When Ethan reached the door, he turned the brass key the county clerk had sealed in an envelope. The lock turned too easily. The door opened to stillness. Inside, light cut through half-closed shutters, revealing dust dancing in narrow beams. The entryway stretched wide, a curved staircase sweeping upward like a frozen wave. The air smelled dry, faintly metallic. It didn't smell like 20 years of rot. Ethan stepped inside. Rex didn't. The shepherd stood on the porch, paw lifted, head low. He gave a low rumble deep in his chest, not a growl of fear, but of warning. "Come on," Ethan whispered. Rex hesitated, then padded in, nails clicking on the stone floor. His body lowered as he moved, nose to the ground, ears flicking toward every sound that wasn't there. The living room lay open to the right. A wide fireplace dominated the wall, its hearth swept clean, wood stacked neatly beside it. Ethan frowned. That kind of order didn't belong in a forgotten house. The furniture was gone, but the air held the faint trace of smoke. Recent smoke. He walked farther in, boots leaving faint prints in the dust. The footprints didn't match the others he began to see. Barely visible, but smaller, fresher. Rex stopped near a hallway at the back, nose twitching rapidly. His tail straightened, then froze. Ethan's hand instinctively brushed his hip where a sidearm used to hang. Old habits die slower than fear. "Talk to me, boy," he said. Rex's lips lifted slightly, ears sharp toward the wall ahead. He sniffed again, then pressed his nose to the baseboard and pawed once. Ethan knelt. The paint felt different, thin, newer. He knocked. A hollow echo came back. He exhaled. Somebody's been here. From upstairs came a faint sound, like a door hinge sighing. Both of them froze. Ethan rose slowly, eyes scanning the ceiling. He told himself it was wind, wood settling. Anything but what it sounded like. Rex moved first, stepping between Ethan and the staircase, body angled to shield him. That stance, steady, unflinching, was one Ethan had seen a dozen times overseas. It meant danger close. "Easy," he murmured. "No need to go hero on me tonight." But Rex's gaze didn't waver. Ethan switched on his flashlight. The beam caught the banister, cleaner than the rest, the polish still faintly oily. Someone had touched it recently. He swept the light across the foyer. Dust lay everywhere except in 2 narrow paths, one from the front door to the fireplace, another from the stairs to the hallway where Rex now stood guard. A low thud echoed above them, not loud, not random. Rex growled softly, and Ethan felt his heart climb into his throat. He'd heard that sound before, the second before a wall collapsed, the second before the trap went off. Then silence. He forced himself to breathe. "Okay," he said, more to keep his voice steady than anything. "We check it. Then we leave if it's nothing." He crossed to the staircase, each step groaning beneath his weight. Rex followed close, breathing steady, eyes burning gold in the flashlight's edge. On the landing, a corridor stretched both ways. Doors lined each side, closed, patient. Ethan tried the first handle. Locked. The second opened easily, revealing a study thick with dust, books sagging on their shelves. The third door stuck halfway. He pushed harder. It gave suddenly, and a wave of cold air rolled out. The room beyond was nearly empty except for a single chair facing the window, and a coffee cup sitting on the sill, the liquid inside still damp. Ethan's pulse slammed once, hard. He knelt, touching the cup. Warm. He turned to Rex. The dog's hackles stood straight, his body rigid as iron. They weren't alone. A noise behind them, soft, deliberate. The front door downstairs clicking shut. Ethan and Rex froze. No voices, no footsteps. Just the wind rising outside, sweeping across the fields, and the quiet certainty that whoever had left that cup hadn't gone far. Rex turned toward the stairs, nose high, ears tracking something only he could hear. Ethan whispered, "Let's go." They descended fast and silent. When they reached the foyer, the front door stood wide open, swaying gently in the draft. Outside, the gravel drive stretched empty, but the air smelled of exhaust. Whoever it was had driven away, or planned to come back. Ethan shut the door and locked it, his hands trembling just enough to feel it. He looked, down at Rex, whose eyes stayed fixed on the window. 50 cents, he thought. 50 cents for a house and a secret. The dog lifted his head and gave one low bark, measured, sure, as if to say he already knew the price would be higher. Morning came grey and heavy. The mansion breathed a kind of silence that didn't belong to old houses. It was too deliberate, too aware. Ethan brewed coffee on a camping stove he'd set up in the kitchen, the flame hissing in the cold air. Rex lay nearby, head flat on his paws, watching the back wall. He hadn't relaxed once since they moved in. When Ethan poured the coffee, Rex's ears twitched. The dog stood up slowly, nose lifting. He gave a single, low growl. It wasn't aggression. It was the sound he used in Afghanistan when he caught a scent no one else could. "What is it?" Ethan asked softly. Rex didn't answer, of course, but he began to move. Slow, deliberate steps toward the far end of the kitchen. His nails clicked once, twice against the tile before he stopped at the corner where the wall met the floor. He sniffed, head tilting, then pawed at the baseboard. Once. Twice. Harder the third time. "Hey, easy," Ethan muttered, setting down the mug. He knelt beside him. The paint near the floor had a faint ripple, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. He ran his fingers along it. Smooth in one spot, rough in the next. Rex barked once, sharp and focused, then pressed his nose against the wall again, breathing fast. Dust stirred in the morning light. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He had seen that kind of urgency before, the kind that meant the difference between a buried mine and a safe road. He retrieved his flashlight and a small crowbar from his truck outside. When he came back, Rex was waiting, tail stiff, eyes locked on the same patch of wall. Ethan tapped gently. "Hollow. Good boy," he whispered. The plaster gave with a crack, the smell of cold air spilling out from behind it. He peeled away more of the wall, dust raining over his hands until the outline of a narrow wooden door appeared, sealed with layers of old cement, smooth like skin grown over a wound. Rex stepped back, ears straight up. Ethan pressed his shoulder into the door. It didn't budge. He tried again, harder this time, the sound echoing through the empty kitchen. Finally, something shifted inside. A seam opened just wide enough for him to pry it free. The cement split, flaking down in pale sheets. Behind it, stairs descended into darkness. The air smelled stale, but not rotten, more like paper sealed too long. He clicked on the flashlight. The beam cut through a thin mist of dust, revealing steps of unfinished concrete leading to a room below. Rex hesitated at the threshold, nose twitching. Then he looked back at Ethan as if asking for permission. "Go ahead, partner," Ethan said quietly. The shepherd descended first, each step careful, silent. Ethan followed, ducking his head to clear the low ceiling. The beam of light landed on a desk, an old metal filing cabinet, and shelves lined with objects wrapped in plastic sheeting. At the far end, a chair sat beside a military-issue jacket draped over a hook. Ethan's light froze on the stitched name tag. Henry Caldwell, Mayor Henry Caldwell, the man who had vanished 8 years ago. Ethan stared, heart thudding. The county had held vigils, declared him dead, even built a plaque downtown. Yet here was his jacket, the wool clean, the metal buttons still shining faintly. He approached the desk. A leather-bound notebook lay open, pages filled with tight handwriting. Dust covered most of it, except for a few faint finger marks along the edge. Someone had touched it recently. Rex circled the room once, nose hovering near the cabinets. He sniffed, then stopped abruptly at one of the drawers. His body stiffened. He pressed his paw against it. Ethan opened the drawer. Inside were manila folders, brittle from time but carefully stacked. Property deeds, financial statements, a map of Maple Hollow with sections circled in red. Underneath, a photograph. 3 men stood in front of the mansion. Caldwell, another man Ethan didn't recognize, and his father. Ethan's breath caught. His father had worked as a land surveyor for the county before dying in what everyone called an accident. Rex growled low, pulling Ethan back to the present. The sound wasn't directed at the drawer. It came from above. Footsteps. Slow, steady, crossing the floor directly over their heads. Ethan's pulse quickened. He turned off the flashlight. The darkness closed in, thick and absolute. He could hear Rex's breathing beside him, controlled, silent, disciplined. The same rhythm he'd heard during raids overseas when the dog was waiting for a signal. The footsteps moved again. 2 steps, then pause. A board creaked. Then another. The sound reached the top of the basement stairs. Rex positioned himself between Ethan and the door, muscles taut. His tail was straight, his ears forward, his eyes fixed on the faint outline of the entry above. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out his knife, the only weapon he had brought. The handle felt cold, almost slick with sweat. He waited. The footsteps stopped. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then a soft click echoed through the house, the sound of the front door closing. Ethan exhaled slowly, every muscle trembling from holding still too long. He turned the flashlight back on, sweeping it across the basement one last time. On the far wall, he noticed something he'd missed before, a faded message scrawled in pencil. "Trust no one in town." He stared at the words, then looked at Rex, who stood watching him, tail lowered but steady, breathing calm again. "You found it," Ethan whispered. "You found everything." Rex blinked once, slow, as if confirming it. They climbed the stairs back into the light. The kitchen looked the same, silent, empty. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had been inside still wasn't far away. He closed the basement door, nailed a board across it, and leaned against the counter, listening. Outside, the wind had died. Inside, every creak of the house sounded like breath. And Rex, still watching the door, let out a soft growl that said it all. The past wasn't buried. It was waiting. By sunrise, the storm had lifted. The hills of Maple Hollow lay washed clean under a pale winter sky. Ethan stood by his truck, a list in his hand, and the first real plan he'd had in months. Food, nails, new locks, ordinary things to make the mansion feel less like a tomb. Rex jumped into the passenger seat without being told. His shoulder still bore a thin scratch from the night before, a souvenir from clawing at that sealed wall. He sat tall, alert, scanning the trees as they rolled down the dirt road toward town. Maple Hollow looked as if time had slowed just for it. One main street, 2 diners, a post office, and a general store that doubled as the local gossip hall. As Ethan parked, a few men leaned against a truck by the hardware shop, lowering their voices when they saw him. Inside the store, the air smelled of pine soap and coffee. Shelves of canned goods and tools lined the walls. Behind the counter stood an older woman with silver hair tied back in a bun. Her name tag read Marjorie. Her eyes lingered a little too long on the dust-stained coat Ethan wore. "Morning," he said, forcing a friendly tone. "Just moved in up the road. The old Caldwell place." The sound of that name stopped her hand mid-reach. Around the room, 2 customers glanced over. "You bought that house?" she asked quietly. 50 cents, Ethan said, half smiling. "Guess it was quite the deal." Marjorie didn't smile back. She folded her arms, studying him. "That place doesn't stay empty long. People think it's abandoned, but it isn't." "Not really." He waited for her to explain, but she only looked past him, eyes clouding like she was remembering something she wished she could forget. A younger man stacking canned beans nearby spoke up. "My uncle used to do maintenance up there before Caldwell disappeared. Said he heard voices when the place was locked tight. Don't go poking around too much, mister. Some things want to stay buried." Ethan paid for his supplies, offered a polite nod, and left. Outside, the air felt heavier, as if the whole town had exhaled after he stepped out. Rex waited by the truck door, ears flicking toward every sound. "You feel it too, huh?" Ethan said softly. Rex's eyes met his for a moment, then turned toward the direction of the mansion. That was answer enough. By the time they reached home, the sun had already begun to sink behind the ridge. The house stood cold and unwelcoming, its windows reflecting the fading light. Ethan carried the groceries inside, setting them on the counter. Rex trotted straight into the living room without pause. He stopped in front of the fireplace, sniffing hard. The ashes inside were old but uneven, as if someone had stirred them recently. Ethan knelt, brushing aside soot. Beneath the charred wood, his fingers found a piece of fabric wedged between 2 bricks, smooth, faded blue wool. He pulled it free. It was part of a jacket sleeve, with a torn edge where a name tag once hung. Caldwell. But when Ethan turned toward the coat rack where he had hung the full jacket the night before, it was gone. He felt the air leave his chest. He had left it right there, folded neatly beside his tools. "Rex." His voice was barely a whisper. The dog circled the fireplace, sniffing faster, tail low. Then he pawed at the floor just beneath the hearthstone, nails scraping against something hollow. Ethan grabbed a metal poker and pried at the edge of one stone tile. It shifted, revealing a narrow gap. Rex barked once, short, sharp. The same bark he had used in Afghanistan when he located a trapped survivor. Ethan widened the opening, coughing as dust rose around them. Inside was a small metal box, no larger than a lunch tin, sealed with rusted hinges. He carried it to the table, hands trembling slightly as he forced it open. Inside lay stacks of letters tied with string, a handful of black and white photographs, and a small pocket knife engraved with the initials D.W., his father's initials. Ethan sank into the chair. The first photograph showed 3 men standing in front of the mansion when it was still bright and new. Caldwell, smiling in his mayor's sash. Another man in a county uniform. And beside them, his father, younger, his arm around Caldwell's shoulder. Ethan's throat tightened. His father had never spoken of working for Caldwell. He'd died in a construction accident 12 years ago. Or that's what the report had said. He picked up one of the letters. The paper was yellowed, edges brittle. Written in his father's handwriting. Henry, the land deeds don't match. Someone's altering records. If this reaches you, we need to talk before they find out. Before who found out? Rex's growl snapped him back. The dog stood by the window, ears pricked, tail rigid. Outside, headlights swept across the yard, then cut off. A car door shut. Ethan turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, save for the faint glow of the dying embers. He crouched beside Rex, whispering, "Stay." Footsteps crunched on gravel, then silence. Rex's breathing slowed, his body coiled like a spring. The sound of a car engine came again, this time fading away. Ethan waited a long time before standing. He replaced the box, covering the hole in the hearth, though now every shadow in the house felt like it was watching. He looked down at Rex. The dog was still staring at the window, every muscle alert. "Someone doesn't want us here," Ethan said quietly. Rex turned his head toward him, eyes dark but steady, the same look he'd given him in war zones when things were about to turn. Ethan reached down and rested a hand on the shepherd's neck. "Whatever this is, we finish it together." Outside, the wind began to rise again, rattling the shutters, and somewhere far down the road, a single set of headlights flickered once in the distance, like someone waiting to see if the house lights would come back on. The afternoon light thinned to a grey ribbon along the hall as Ethan worked the new deadbolts into the front door. The house had stopped pretending to be abandoned. Every board had a memory. Every draft carried a hint of breath. Rex stood at the base of the staircase, head cocked, nose angled towards the shadow where the first riser met the wall. "You got something?" Ethan said. Rex didn't glance back. He pressed his nose to the trim and inhaled, slow and deep, then scraped once with his paw. It wasn't frantic. It was purposeful, the methodical cadence he'd used on rubble piles when a human scent threaded through dust and lime. Ethan ran his fingers along the molding. Paint ridges. A hairline gap. He tapped. Hollow. He grabbed the multi-tool and pried at the seam. The trim resisted, then flexed. A narrow sliver of darkness opened behind it, breathing out a rush of air that smelled like cold paper and damp stone. Rex stepped aside, eyes never leaving the opening. The space was tight, a crawl-width corridor running behind the stairs. Ethan slid in sideways with the flashlight, shoulders brushing rough plaster. Rex followed, his body low, paws landing without sound. The passage bent once, then again, and emptied into a chamber carved beneath the staircase like a second lung. The beam caught metal. Rows of filing cabinets stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces scarred and labelled in the clipped block letters of county work. Cardboard banker boxes lined 2 sawhorse tables. Maps, hundreds, hung from binder clips on a string line, their edges curled. The room didn't look abandoned. It looked curated. Ethan's breath condensed in a thin cloud. He swept the light over the nearest cabinet. Deeds, right-of-way permits, survey plats. Maple Hollow trailed across every folder. He slid one drawer open. Manila folders rode on steel rails, tight as a locked jaw. He pulled a file at random. Transfer of Parcel 14B. A signature line glistened with glossy black ink, as if the pen had touched it yesterday. Rex sniffed the drawers, then bristled. He moved to the back wall where a corkboard had been nailed into the studs. Photos and receipts were pinned in rows. A corner held a small cluster of black and white snapshots. 3 men stood in front of the mansion, shoulders squared against the sun. Henry Caldwell, a county road chief Ethan didn't recognize, and his father, younger and leaner, jaw set, a margin smile. In the lower right-hand corner, a pencil scrawl. Site B, don't file. Ethan stepped closer. Beneath the photos was an envelope addressed in a careful hand to the state. Attorney General. Unsent. The flap was unsealed. He slid the letter free and read by the crescent of light. Altering of land records is ongoing. Parcels reassigned through shell entities. My own reports removed from county archive. If I go missing, check the quarry ledger. Do not trust the sheriff's office. His father's signature ran straight and stubborn across the bottom. D. Ward, Land Inspector. Ethan looked away, throat tight. His father had died under a concrete slab with a forklift's tire marks chalked as misfortune. The report had been thin. No inquiry. No one had asked why an inspector was on that site after hours. Now the answer breathed from the walls. Rex pressed his shoulder into Ethan's leg, then lifted his nose toward a sagging bookcase. He pawed its base once. Ethan crouched and found a slim recorder taped to the underside of the shelf. Modern, fresh tape. He clicked it open with his nail. The compartment held a battery stamped with a recent expiration date. Someone had been here within months, maybe days. He turned the recorder on. Static bit the air, then settled into a low hum. A man's voice broke across it, soft, careful, trained to avoid microphones. Ledger move complete. Site B intact. If the new owner digs, we flush. The recording cut. No names, no dates, just the cold shape of a plan. Rex's body changed in an instant. Ears straight, head lifted. The sound reached Ethan a beat later, a weight settling on floorboards above them, followed by a slow, measured step. Not wind, not the house. A step. Another. The cadence moved toward the front of the mansion, then paused. Ethan killed the flashlight. Dark sealed them in. He felt Rex shift and come forward until the dog's shoulder pressed against his shin. The heat of him steadied the room. Another step. Farther away this time. The faint click of a latch. Silence. He breathed through his nose and counted 10 before he let the light bloom again. The beam swept the back table and landed on an open ledger. Columns of payments ran down the page. The names at the top were tidy, corporate, forgettable. The payees were not. Sheriff's Equipment Fund, Veterans Relief Committee, Maple Hollow Youth Center. Every line bled out into a shell company that cashed a check and left a gap where a roof should have been. At the bottom of the page, a signature, H. Caldwell. Beside it, a second signature that made the blood leave Ethan's hands. The current sheriff. Rex whined low, a sound that belonged to the moment before a breach. Ethan nodded once. He photographed the ledger and stuffed the recorder and the unsent letter inside his jacket. He moved the photo with Site B, don't file, to the top of the stack, and took that too. Then he closed the drawer, smoothed the dust with his forearm the way he had seen his father do with survey chalk, and looked at the dog. Back the way we came. They slid into the corridor. Halfway to the entry, Rex stopped and did something he rarely did in tight spaces. He turned and faced the chamber, spine straight, and exhaled through his nose with force. Then he backed up step by step, never taking his eyes off the room, guarding Ethan's retreat. They emerged behind the stair skirt, where the wall would swallow the sight of anyone coming down. The house above them felt still. Too still. Ethan eased the trim back into place and pressed until the seam sat flush. He listened. A truck shifting gears on the distant county road. A crow picking at the last light in the field. Inside, nothing. They moved into the foyer. The front door stood closed, the new deadbolt thrown. Ethan checked it anyway. Cold brass. Secure. He crossed to the parlor window and lifted the edge of the curtain. The gravel drive stretched empty. The tire grooves that had cut it the night before were half filled by wind and silt. No fresh tracks. Rex stood in the middle of the room, weight over his front paws, head pivoting in small degrees, cataloguing the air. Then he walked to the fireplace and stared up at the mantel. Ethan followed his gaze. The coffee cup was back on the sill. The one Ethan had found upstairs, still warm hours ago. It sat here now, beside a length of blue wool neatly folded into a square. Caldwell's sleeve. Ethan went cold. He had left that wool in a grocery sack by the kitchen sink. He hadn't touched the cup all day. Someone had been in, and then had the nerve to move things where he would see them. Rex's lips lifted. The sound he made wasn't a growl so much as an engine beginning to turn. Ethan put a hand on his shoulder. The muscle under his palm felt like cable. He checked the back door. Locked. The kitchen window. Latched. He stared at the cup again. A rim of damp clung to the inside. Fresh. He set it down gently and turned toward the stairs to check the second floor. A breath of wind, or what he wanted to be wind, touched the back of his neck. Then the slam came. A door above them, violent and final, reverberating down the plaster, scattering dust into the beam of late day. Rex shot forward, then stopped at the base of the steps without being told. He planted. He looked up and waited for Ethan to decide. Ethan felt the old instincts align, the ones he had buried under civilian patience. He moved left to the hall closet and pulled a steel pry bar from the bucket of tools. Not a weapon, but weight. Something that changed a man's mind. He nodded to Rex. They went up together. Halfway to the landing, Ethan paused. A faint vibration ticked in the wood like a heartbeat. He killed the light and listened. Silence. Then the softest scrape, like a shoe turning on dust. They reached the landing. Bedroom doors waited, closed and ordinary in their paint. The door at the end, the one that had stuck earlier, now stood ajar. A draught moved through it. Ethan felt the cold brush his face. Rex slid past him, low and ready, stopping on the threshold. He put his nose to the gap and breathed. One slow inhale, one exhale. His ears flattened for a second. Then they lifted again. He glanced back at Ethan. Clear of immediate presence. Not safe. The look said both. Ethan pushed the door with 2 fingers. The room opened on emptiness. The chair still faced the window. The sill was bare. The cup had been moved downstairs, and with it the deliberate message, I was here. I can be here again. Something else waited on the floor. A small square of paper, crisp and white, scented like a calling card. Ethan crouched without touching it. A photograph stared up from the fibers. Him, standing at the county annex yesterday, keys to the mansion in his hand, Rex at his side. On the back, a pencil note in tidy block letters. You don't own history, you just found the door. Rex shifted closer until his shoulder pressed against Ethan's knee. The dog's chest rose once, deep and calm. He wasn't rattled. He was recording the room with every sense, building a map no human could draw. Ethan slid the photo into his pocket and stood. Fear finished its shout and left room for something else. It wasn't courage. It was clarity. The chamber under the stairs was not a hoarder's cache. It was an archive, a ledger of a town's wrong turn. His father had tried to turn it back and had been swallowed instead. He looked at Rex. We lock it down, then we take this outside the county line. Rex's tail moved once, slow and certain, as if he'd been waiting for Ethan to say it out loud. They went room by room and window by window, securing what could be secured. At the last door, a thought pressed hard enough to speak. He returned to the hidden chamber and pulled one more thing from the corkboard. A topo map with a circle drawn east of town. He traced the ridge lines with his finger. A decommissioned quarry sat under the ink. Site B. As he slid the map into his jacket, the floor above him creaked one final time. Not a footstep. Not exactly. More like a hand lifting from a banister. A goodbye that promised a return. Ethan shut the trim and palmed it flush. He rested his hand on Rex's neck. The dog looked up, eyes steady, not asking, not doubting. The house had stopped pretending. So had he. Ethan drove down the narrow road into Maple Hollow's main street just after dawn, the hidden map and his father's letter folded tight inside his jacket. Rex sat upright in the passenger seat, head near the window, eyes fixed on every passing car as if memorizing them. The morning fog hadn't lifted yet, and the town looked half asleep, half afraid to wake. He parked beside the diner, where Grace Turner had agreed to meet him. The name sounded familiar. She'd written a series of investigative articles on local government contracts years ago before disappearing from the state press. When Ethan emailed her the photos of Caldwell's files, she replied within hours, "Meet me. Don't bring the originals, and don't come alone." Now she was there, waiting, by the window booth, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in front of her. Her hair was tied back loosely, a laptop open beside a half-eaten muffin. Her eyes met his the moment he stepped through the door. "You're the one who bought the Caldwell place," she said, her voice low but steady. "The man who found something he shouldn't have." Ethan slid into the seat opposite. Rex sat just outside the glass, visible from the booth, his gaze sweeping the lot. "You can call me Ethan. And yeah, that's me." Grace nodded slowly, her hands tightening around the mug. "I wrote about Caldwell 8 years ago before he disappeared. Everyone thought he'd fled with public money, but it was bigger. Land transfers, dummy corporations, shell charities. Half the town's infrastructure money went missing. The state shut down my story before I could print the names." Ethan placed the letter and one photograph on the table. "You might want to read this before you decide whether to walk away again." She leaned forward. The photo showed Caldwell and Ethan's father shaking hands in front of the mansion. Grace's expression changed. Part recognition, part disbelief. She picked up the letter next. Her voice trembled slightly as she read aloud. "If I go missing, check the quarry ledger. Do not trust the sheriff's office." She looked up. "Do you understand what this means? This connects your father to Caldwell's missing case? And that quarry—" She stopped, lowering her voice. "That quarry was sealed off a month before the mayor disappeared. The county said it was unstable ground. But I have satellite records showing trucks moving in and out for another year." Ethan frowned. "Then someone's been covering it since before he died." Grace exhaled, rubbing her temple. "And now you're reopening it. They'll know." Rex's bark interrupted her. Sharp, deliberate, the sound echoing through the diner's window like a shot. Ethan turned immediately. The German shepherd was standing rigid by the truck, ears pointed towards the street. A black SUV idled across the road, windows tinted, engine humming just above a whisper. "Anyone you know drive that?" Ethan asked quietly. Grace didn't turn her head. "No, but I've seen one just like it outside the courthouse. No plates." Rex growled again, lower this time, body angled protectively towards the diner door. Ethan gathered the papers quickly. "We need to move." Grace shook her head. "If they wanted to scare us, they'd stay parked. If they wanted to end it, they'd come inside. That means they're waiting for something." He glanced at Rex, who hadn't broken focus once. "They're watching." "Exactly," she said. "And they already know you found the room." Ethan's pulse quickened. He looked around the diner. 2 old men by the counter, the waitress pouring coffee, everyone pretending not to stare. Grace shut her laptop and slipped the photo into her bag. "We can't talk here. There's a safe place. My uncle's print shop on the edge of town. He still owes me for keeping his bankruptcy out of the paper." They exited through the back alley, Rex leading, nose to the wind. The dog stopped twice, once near a trash bin, once near a drain pipe, each time sniffing, alert. Ethan had learned to read him like a second language. Danger close, but not immediate. Someone had been there recently. Grace unlocked her old Jeep, the kind with mismatched paint and no logos. Ethan hesitated before climbing in. "If they're tracking me, they'll follow." Grace gave a small smile. "Then let's make the story worth following." They drove out of town, the SUV trailing behind at a polite distance until the last stoplight. Then it disappeared. Or maybe it just turned off its lights. Ethan checked the mirror again. Nothing. Rex, though, stayed tense, staring at the dark woods along the highway. At the print shop, Grace ushered him into a cluttered back office. Newspaper clippings plastered the walls, half of them hers. Scandals, resignations, corruption cases that had vanished from the state's records. She booted up a computer, connecting a portable drive. "Let's see what your father left behind." Ethan placed the scanned files and recordings on the desk. The video feed flickered on the screen. A map of county zoning overlays, each one marked with red circles like blood stains. Grace clicked one open and froze. "This isn't just Maple Hollow," she said. "These are linked counties. Caldwell's company was tied to land swaps for an interstate project that never got built. They were burying environmental violations, buying off inspectors. Your father probably caught it." She scrolled faster, eyes widening. "Wait. Look here. There's a signature block from the sheriff's office authorizing the transfers. That means Caldwell didn't act alone. Someone higher up was keeping the state out." Ethan felt the weight of the words settle in his chest. "And they killed my father to keep it quiet." Grace met his gaze, her expression tight with sympathy but firm. "Maybe. But it also means you're sitting on evidence that could ruin half the county board. You need to get it to someone outside state lines. I know a contact at the Louisville Herald. She's stubborn enough to print it." Before Ethan could answer, Rex let out another growl. Short, deep, unmistakable. The sound of imminent threat. Grace moved to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. "They found us." The same black SUV had pulled up across the street, lights off, engine idling. 2 silhouettes inside. No movement. Ethan's hand went to the crowbar in his jacket. Old instincts snapped awake. "You got another exit?" "Loading bay, behind the press rollers," Grace said. They slipped out the back, Rex taking point. His body language was sharp, ears high, head moving side to side, mapping the air. Ethan trusted that more than any camera feed. He'd followed that dog through fire once. He'd follow him again. They reached the gravel yard just as the SUV's door opened. A man stepped out, clean suit, heavy boots, the kind of confidence that came with authority. His face was hidden under the brim of a hat, but Ethan caught the glint of a sheriff's badge on the belt. Grace whispered, "Told you not to trust the sheriff." Ethan's chest tightened. "Looks like we just found proof he's still cleaning Caldwell's mess." The man's voice cut through the air. "Mr. Ward, Miss Turner, you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Rex barked once, a sharp warning that echoed off the tin walls. The sheriff stopped mid-step. Ethan didn't answer. He reached into his jacket, pulled the recorder, and held it up so the man could see. "Actually," he said, "I think it belongs to the truth." The sheriff's expression flickered, Fear, then control. Careful. People who dig too deep around here tend to disappear. Ethan took one slow step back towards the truck. Then I guess you should have buried it better. Rex growled again, the sound reverberating through the yard like a fuse being lit. The sheriff's hand twitched toward his belt, but by the time he looked up again, Grace had already swung the truck door open. They climbed in, gravel spraying as the tires caught. The SUV lunged forward, but Rex barked twice, timed, precise, his warning enough for Ethan to swerve down the service road that cut behind the mill. They disappeared into the fog, the mansion's outline waiting on the distant ridge. Inside the truck, Grace's breathing slowed, adrenaline fading into disbelief. You just turned a local corruption case into a federal one. Ethan's eyes stayed on the road. No, my father did. We're just finishing it. Rex lay in the back seat, head resting on the metal case that held the files. His eyes stayed open, reflecting the passing light. Watching. Always watching. Behind them, the black SUV idled at the crossroads, its headlights off, patient as a predator. The kind that didn't chase, just waited for you to come home. The wind shifted that night, carrying the cold smell of rain across the valley. The mansion sat silent on its hill, half lit by the flicker of a dying generator. Power had been out since sunset, the lines downed somewhere beyond the ridge. Ethan sat by the kitchen table, flashlight set upright, its beam slicing the dark into two pale columns. Grace worked beside him, scanning through copies of the files they had pulled from the hidden room. Every sound in the house seemed amplified. The tick of a pipe, the creak of an old floorboard, the slow rhythm of Rex's breathing by the front door. Rex hadn't slept once since dusk. His body stayed tense, head lifting at the slightest noise. Ethan trusted that posture more than any lock or gun. You think they'll come tonight? Grace whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He was thinking about the sheriff's face, the way the man had smiled even with the recorder pointed at him. Not fear, calculation. A man who already had a plan. The lights flickered. The generator outside coughed twice and fell silent. Rex's head snapped up. His ears pointed toward the back of the house, nose twitching. Ethan turned off the flashlight. The room collapsed into black. Then came the hiss, faint like a snake drawing breath. Ethan frowned. You hear that? Grace froze. What is it? Rex moved first. He trotted toward the kitchen wall, nostrils flaring, body low. The sound grew louder, a steady, rising whisper beneath the floorboards. Ethan followed him to the old gas heater, the smell hitting him a moment later. Sharp, metallic, wrong. Gas. He lunged for the valve under the counter, twisting it shut. The hiss slowed, then died. His heart kept racing long after the sound stopped. They cut the line, he said. They wanted the place to fill before the spark hit. Grace's face went pale in the dim light from the window. They were going to blow us up. Rex growled softly, pacing in circles, looking toward the back door. His tail was straight, his body vibrating with restrained warning. Ethan moved to the window, pulling the curtain back an inch. The night outside was thick with fog. Through it, two beams of light swept across the yard. Flashlights, moving slow, deliberate. He turned back to Grace. Basement, now. They moved quickly. Rex stayed at Ethan's side, his breathing low and steady. In the basement, the air was cooler, heavy with dust. Ethan pulled them behind the old furnace, where a narrow slit of light from the ground-level vent gave them a view of the yard. Two figures crossed the grass. One held a flashlight, the other a crowbar. Both wore dark jackets and caps pulled low. They weren't thieves. They were methodical, checking windows, scanning door frames, moving like men who knew the layout. Rex pressed close to the vent, silent. Only the faint twitch of his ear betrayed his tension. Grace whispered, "What if they come in? Then they'll find out they're not the only ones who know the ground here." Ethan said quietly. His eyes followed the men. They stopped by the propane tank, crouching low. One struck a lighter to test the line. The flame flared bright, then vanished. The man muttered something and shook his head. The other motioned toward the tree line, and they moved off, disappearing into the fog. Ethan waited until the night swallowed them completely. Only then did he breathe again. Rex turned from the vent, nose still twitching, and looked at him. Ethan reached out, resting his hand on the dog's neck. "You saved us again," he said, voice low. They waited another 20 minutes before emerging. The generator was still dead. Grace lit a single candle, its glow trembling against the cracked plaster walls. The air still smelled faintly of gas. Ethan opened a window to vent the room, then checked the lines outside. The cut was clean, done with professional precision, not vandalism. Whoever had done it knew exactly where to strike. "They didn't come to scare us," Grace said, standing at the doorway. "They came to erase us." Ethan nodded. "And the files." He went back to the kitchen table, laying out the map and letters they had saved. In the flicker of candlelight, the inked circles on the map looked darker, more sinister. Site B was 3 miles east, at the quarry. Everything pointed there. Grace rubbed her arms, shivering. "If they went to that much trouble, there's something bigger under that site." Ethan looked at her. "Then we're going to find out what it is." A sudden noise from outside, metal scraping against stone, cut the air. They both turned. Rex was already at the door, teeth bared, growl rising from deep in his chest. Ethan grabbed the crowbar again. "Basement window," he said. They hurried back downstairs. This time the beam of a flashlight sliced through the small vent. A hand reached inside, probing the gap. Ethan crouched low, heart pounding. Rex crept forward, silent as breath, and placed himself directly under the vent. The hand reached deeper. Rex snapped once, fast, a flash of teeth. A man's yell split the night. The flashlight dropped, rolling through the grass outside. Then footsteps, running, 2 sets, pounding toward the woods. Ethan opened the basement door and stepped into the yard. The fog swallowed everything beyond 10 feet. He could hear the rustle of movement fading towards the highway. He turned back to see Rex standing in the doorway, fur bristled, chest heaving. "Good work," Ethan said softly. They went inside again, locking every door, every window. Grace slumped into the chair, still shaking. "They'll come back." Ethan poured water into a pot and set it on the stove. "Then we'll be ready next time." Rex circled once before lying near the front door again, his eyes glowing faintly in the candlelight. The faint scar along his muzzle caught the light, making him look like a soldier carved from shadow. Grace looked at him for a long time. "He doesn't relax, does he?" Ethan shook his head. "He will when it's safe." She met his eyes. "You really think it ever will be?" He didn't answer. The truth hung in the still air between them. Outside, somewhere beyond the hill, a car engine turned over, then faded into the distance. The mansion groaned as if it had heard it too. Ethan checked the locks one more time, before sitting on the floor beside Rex. The dog's eyes stayed fixed on the door, unblinking. The house wasn't haunted. It was hunted. And tonight the hunter had learned that one of its ghosts could bite back. The map had led them down an old service road choked with weeds and silence. It wound 3 miles east of Maple Hollow, past the county line, ending at a chain-link gate half-collapsed under rust. A sign hung crooked on the fence. "Property of Maple Hollow Mining Commander closed due to hazard." Ethan cut the engine and let the truck idle down to a hum. The sky was low and colourless, the kind of grey that promised rain without ever delivering it. Rex jumped out first, nose to the wind, tail stiff. He sniffed once, then twice, before turning toward the trees that bordered the quarry. Grace adjusted the strap of her camera bag, eyes scanning the ridgeline. If this is Site B, it's not much of a secret anymore. Ethan shook his head. Secrets don't need to be far. They just need to be quiet. They slipped through the gap in the fence. The ground sloped downward into a basin where the old quarry had filled with rainwater over the years. Machinery lay scattered like bones, cranes rusted to orange, conveyor belts half buried in mud. The air smelled of iron and dust. Rex moved ahead, nose pressed to the earth. His pace quickened near a stack of old concrete blocks. He pawed once at the dirt, then barked sharply, the sound echoing across the quarry walls. Ethan knelt beside him. The ground was uneven, disturbed. Someone had dug here recently, then tried to smooth it over. He brushed away the top layer, revealing fragments of plastic sheeting beneath. Grace crouched next to him, camera in hand. Jesus, look at this! Ethan pulled harder, the plastic giving way with a dry crack. Beneath it were files, hundreds of them, stuffed into waterproof sleeves. County records, maps, stamped permits. He recognized the handwriting on some of the notes. His father's. Grace flipped through a few pages, her eyes wide. These are originals, not copies. Land transfers, financial ledgers, even death certificates. Caldwell didn't steal from the county. He buried the evidence. Ethan found a sealed envelope marked with a faded stamp. Inside were photographs, excavation shots of the quarry itself. In one, 2 men stood beside a trench. One of them was Caldwell. The other was a face Ethan had seen only in his nightmares, his father. The next photo showed something darker. The trench again, but this time it wasn't empty. 2 bodies wrapped in tarp. Ethan felt his stomach twist. This is where they put them. Grace swallowed hard. We need to call the police. This is murder. He stared at her. You really think the sheriff's office is going to help us now? She hesitated, then shook her head. Then we go higher. Rex barked again, this time toward the quarry's edge. He trotted ahead, nose to the ground, tail flicking side to side. Ethan followed. The dog stopped near a half-collapsed shed at the perimeter, sniffing the air with short, sharp breaths. Inside, under the rotted roof, they found more evidence. Crates filled with storage drives, marked Town Archive Backup. Grace dusted one off, disbelief in her voice. He copied everything, every contract, every report. Caldwell signed. He must have known they were coming for him. Ethan picked up one of the drives. He tried to protect it. And he died for it. Grace whispered. The wind rose suddenly, scattering dust through the shed. Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. His body froze. A second later, the echo of an engine reached them from the ridge. Grace cursed under her breath. They followed us. Ethan stuffed the drives and files into his bag. We've got what we need. We move now. They sprinted toward the truck. The engine's rumble grew louder, headlights slicing through the fog. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the top of the slope, the same one from town. Go! Ethan shouted. Rex leapt into the bed of the truck as Ethan threw it into gear. Gravel sprayed behind them as they tore up the path toward the main road. A single shot cracked the air, then another. The rear window shattered. Grace ducked, covering her head. Keep low! Ethan shouted. He swerved hard right, tires spitting dirt. Then came the sound he dreaded, the pop of another rifle shot, closer this time. Something struck the tailgate with a metallic thud. Rex barked, loud and defiant, but the third shot was different. It hit the rocks beside them, splintering stone into shards. One fragment ricocheted through the open window. Ethan heard a sharp yelp and slammed the brakes. Rex! The shepherd had fallen against the bed wall, eyes blinking, blood darkening the fur on his shoulder. Ethan's chest went cold. He threw the truck in park and jumped out. Grace yelled behind him, "Ethan, don't!" But he was already there, hands on the dog's side. The wound wasn't deep, a shard, not a bullet, but Rex trembled with pain. "It's okay," Ethan whispered, pressing his jacket against the wound. "You're okay." Rex's eyes locked on his, steady, refusing to flinch. Even hurt, he lifted his head towards the ridge, watching for movement. Grace climbed out, her voice tight. "We need to go now. They'll circle back." Ethan nodded, lifting Rex carefully into the cab. The dog winced, but didn't whine. He settled on the seat, breathing shallow but alert. As they pulled onto the highway, the quarry vanished behind them in the mist. Grace sat in silence, clutching the drives to her chest. After a long moment, she said, "If we can't trust the police, I'll take this straight to the national network. Let the world see what they buried." Ethan stared ahead at the empty road. "Make it fast. They'll come after us harder now." Rex's head rested on Ethan's arm. His breathing steadied, eyes half closed, but still tracking every shadow outside the windshield. "You saved me again, partner," Ethan murmured. The dog blinked once, slow, as if to say he'd do it again without question. Behind them, the quarry settled back into silence. The wind moved through the empty cranes, lifting dust from the ground where the truth had slept for a decade. And above it all, the sheriff's SUV lingered on the ridge, headlights dimmed, watching them vanish into the night. The story broke on a Thursday morning. By noon, it was everywhere. The Caldwell Files, that was the headline Grace's editor had chosen. It ran across the front page of the Louisville Herald, then spread to every major outlet within hours. The evidence, the photographs, the missing records, all of it traced back to Maple Hollow. 30 families, stripped of land and livelihoods. 2 bodies unearthed at Site B, and a dead inspector whose notes had finally seen daylight. Ethan watched the news from the corner of the hospital room where Rex lay. The shepherd's shoulder was stitched and bandaged, his breathing slow but steady. He twitched occasionally in his sleep, as if still chasing ghosts through the fog. Grace stood by the window, her phone vibrating every few minutes. Death threats, legal notices, calls from anonymous sources. She said quietly, "Half the town hates me. The other half wants to thank me." Ethan didn't look up. "You knew it would be like this?" "Yeah," she said, then sighed. "But not this fast." Rex stirred at the sound of her voice. His tail thumped weakly against the sheet. Ethan reached down and ran a hand along his fur, feeling the warmth beneath the bandage. "You did good, buddy," he murmured, "real good." That night, when the hospital lights dimmed, Ethan couldn't sleep. The news anchors kept replaying the footage, federal agents arriving at the quarry, sheriff's deputies being escorted out of the county office, Caldwell's frozen smile in an old photograph. Justice, they called it. But to Ethan, it still felt like unfinished business. The next morning, he got the call. The district attorney wanted to question him. Not as a suspect, yet, but as the primary civilian witness. Grace warned him not to go alone. "I'll be fine," he said, pulling on his jacket. "They won't risk anything public now." But when he arrived at the courthouse, the stares followed him through the lobby like whispers. Reporters hounded the steps, shouting questions, snapping pictures. Inside, the sheriff's office was sealed with yellow tape. Through the glass, Ethan saw agents hauling out boxes of files, the same kind he'd found buried in the quarry. The interrogation room was colder than he expected. A federal investigator named Harding sat across from him, formal but polite. "Mr. Ward, your father's records match the chain of corruption we've been chasing for years," Harding said. "What you found fills in every missing gap." Ethan folded his hands on the table. Then it's over? Harding shook his head. Not yet. Caldwell's gone underground. The warrant's out, but he's got money, contacts, old friends who owe him favors. If he's smart, he'll turn himself in before someone else does it for him. Ethan leaned back, his jaw tight. He will. Harding gave him a curious look. You sound sure. He's not running from me. Ethan said, he's running from the truth. Later that night, back at the house, Rex limped to the front door on his own for the first time since the shooting. He sat there, watching the road in silence, as if waiting for someone only he could sense. Ethan sat beside him, the glow of the TV casting long shadows across the floor. Grace was asleep on the couch, her phone still clutched in her hand. Ethan looked down at the dog. You think he'll come? Rex's ears flicked. Somewhere in the distance, a car engine approached, then slowed. Headlights crawled up the driveway. Ethan stood, every nerve tightening. The car stopped in front of the gate. For a moment, no one moved. Then the door opened, and a man stepped out, older, thinner than Ethan remembered from the photographs, but unmistakable. Caldwell. Ethan opened the door before Rex could bark. The cold hit his face, carrying the smell of rain. Caldwell raised his hands slowly, a faint tremor visible even in the dark. I saw the papers, he said, voice rough. I saw the bodies. I can't keep running from it. Ethan said nothing. The man's face was drawn, haunted. His suit hung loose, mud on the cuffs. You came here, Ethan finally said, to make it right. Caldwell nodded. Your father tried to stop me. He wanted the investigation to go public. I told him he didn't understand what it would cost. I was wrong. Behind Ethan, Rex growled softly, stepping forward. Caldwell froze, eyes flicking to the shepherd's scarred shoulder. He was there, wasn't he? At the quarry. Ethan's voice was calm but cold. He saved my life. Something you never did for anyone else. Caldwell swallowed hard. I'll testify. Everything I know. The other names, the ledgers. Just make sure they hear me before someone silences me, too. By morning, he was in custody. Federal agents led him out of the county jail under heavy guard. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions that vanished under the sound of cameras clicking. Grace was there, press badge swinging from her neck, notebook in hand. She caught Ethan's eye across the crowd and gave a small, knowing nod. Inside the courthouse, the air smelled of polished wood and disinfectant. Ethan walked to the front, carrying the file folder that had started everything. It was old, worn, edges frayed, the last thing his father had touched. The judge called the hearing to order. Caldwell sat at the defense table, head bowed, lips pressed together. His lawyer whispered something, but he didn't respond. When Ethan took the stand, the courtroom fell quiet. He placed the folder on the witness table and opened it carefully. Inside were the handwritten notes, maps, and photographs his father had gathered 15 years ago. He looked up at the judge. My father, Inspector Samuel Ward, died trying to expose this. His voice was steady, every word deliberate. He didn't die for nothing. This town forgot him, but the truth didn't. Across the room, Caldwell's shoulders slumped. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes. Grace, standing near the back, lowered her camera, her expression softening. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with people, families whose names had been erased from land records, neighbors who'd lost everything. They stood in silence as the verdict echoed through the hall. Guilty. When Ethan walked out into the sunlight, Rex limped beside him, bandage still tight around his shoulder. Reporters rushed forward, but Ethan kept moving until they reached the truck. He opened the door, letting Rex climb in first. Grace caught up to them. They'll remember your father's name now, she said. Ethan looked out at the horizon. That's all he ever wanted. As they drove away, the radio buzzed with breaking news. Federal charges filed, state officials resigning, Maple Hollow finally facing its ghosts. Rex rested his head on Ethan's lap, eyes half closed but alert. For the first time in years, the road ahead didn't feel haunted. It felt earned. And somewhere deep down, Ethan knew his father could finally rest, because the truth, at last, was alive. A year had passed since the trial, and the town of Maple Hollow was no longer the same. The old Caldwell mansion, once a symbol of fear and corruption, had been reborn under a new name, Rex Haven. The iron gates that used to creak shut against trespassers now stood wide open, and a wooden sign hung from the archway, hand-carved and simple. Where truth finds its home. Ethan stood on the front porch, paint still streaking his hands. Behind him, boxes of newly catalogued files lined the walls. Decades of county records, evidence, letters, and forgotten histories that locals had begun bringing in voluntarily. What started as a personal promise had grown into something larger, a public archive for transparency and a quiet refuge for people seeking peace. Rex lay beside the porch steps, his muzzle silvered with age, eyes half closed as the breeze stirred through the trees. His ear twitched each time a car rolled up the gravel road. Even in rest, he watched everything. Grace arrived that morning with coffee and a fresh stack of mail. "You've got 3 invitations to speak at veterans centers," she said, placing them on the porch table, "and 1 donation check from some law firm in D.C. They called it a thank you for proving honesty still exists." Ethan smiled faintly. Guess that's rarer than gold these days. Grace leaned against the railing, watching as 2 elderly men from town unloaded boxes from a pickup truck. "They found these in their attic," she said quietly. "Letters from their father. He was one of the families Caldwell displaced." Ethan went down to help. The men looked uncertain, their eyes darting between the mansion's restored facade and the shepherd lying by the stairs. One of them, a wiry man in a faded veteran's cap, finally spoke. "Didn't think I'd ever set foot on this property again. Used to tell my kids this place was cursed." Ethan gestured toward the open door. "Curses lose their power when the truth comes out." The man nodded slowly. "Guess you proved that." Inside, sunlight poured through the high windows, landing on the long oak tables where volunteers worked, organizing documents, scanning photos, tagging names. The hum of quiet conversation filled the once haunted halls. Where dust had gathered, there was now movement and purpose. One wall displayed a photograph of Ethan's father, Samuel Ward, with a simple plaque beneath. He stood for truth when silence was safer. Next to it, a smaller frame showed Rex, still young, caught mid-leap in one of Grace's photos from the trial week. Visitors often paused at that picture first. Something in the dog's eyes made them linger. That afternoon, a group of schoolchildren arrived for a field trip. Their teacher explained the story, how the town had lost its way, how 1 man and 1 dog had helped bring the truth back to light. Ethan gave them a short tour, showing where the files were stored, how they were digitized, how people could look up their families' names. One boy raised his hand. "Mister, is it true your dog found the hidden room?" Ethan looked down at Rex, who was watching them from the doorway. "Yeah," he said softly. "He didn't just find a room. He found the truth." The children gathered around Rex, gentle hands reaching to pet his fur. The old shepherd didn't move much, just wagged his tail once and let them stay. As the day faded, Ethan and Grace sat on the porch steps. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in amber and violet. Fireflies began to appear over the fields. "You ever think you'd end up here?" Grace asked. Ethan shook his head. "I thought the house would swallow me whole when I first saw it. Now look at it. It's alive. she said, smiling. You gave it a new story. He was quiet for a long time. The wind rustled through the oaks, carrying the faint sound of church bells from town. It wasn't me, he said finally. It was him. Rex lifted his head slightly at the sound of his name, ears twitching. Grace chuckled. He's the real mayor of Maple Hollow now. Maybe, Ethan said, and a better one than the last. They laughed quietly. Then, as night settled in, a truck pulled up to the gate. A young woman stepped out, holding a folder close to her chest. She walked up the path hesitantly. Mr. Ward? She asked. My grandfather worked in the county records office. Before he passed, he told me there were things he never got to fix. I thought maybe they belonged here. Ethan took the folder gently. They do. She smiled, relieved. He'd be glad to know that. When she left, the air was thick with the smell of rain and pine. Ethan leaned on the railing, looking out at the darkening forest. Rex was lying with his head between his paws, gazing toward the tree line, the same place where everything had begun. The first drops of rain fell, tapping softly against the porch roof. Ethan sat beside his dog, resting a hand on his neck. You know, he said quietly, I think we finally built something worth guarding. Rex didn't move, but his tail brushed against Ethan's boot, a slow, steady rhythm, a soldier's acknowledgement. Inside the house, the lights glowed warm and steady. The storm rolled in, thunder echoing across the valley, but for the first time in years the old stone mansion didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. And on that porch, as the rain fell and the truth slept safe inside, an old shepherd kept watch. Not because he had to, but because he always would. Morning light filtered through the curtains of the old stone mansion, spilling across the hardwood floors that once groaned under secrets. Now, the house breathed differently. It was filled with life, laughter from the front hall, soft conversation echoing from the reading room, the clatter of mugs, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. Rexhaven had become what Ethan had dreamed of, a sanctuary, not just for veterans and rescue dogs, but for anyone looking to set something right, even if it was only inside themselves. Outside, the fields were green again. Rows of white chairs dotted the front yard where a local veterans support group had gathered for their weekly meeting. At the porch, a few dogs rested by their owners' boots, one missing a leg, another still learning to trust human hands. Ethan walked out with a clipboard, smiling as he passed. "Morning, folks," he greeted, and the group responded with waves and nods. Beside him, Rex moved slower now, his gait careful but steady. His fur had greyed around the muzzle, and the old scar on his shoulder still caught the sunlight when he turned. But his eyes, bright, amber, alert, hadn't changed a bit. "Someone's asking for you," Grace called from the doorway. She was holding a camera and a press badge, the familiar tools of her trade. But this time, she wasn't chasing a story. She was documenting one. On the porch stood a boy, maybe 10 years old, wearing a faded baseball cap and clutching a small notebook. His mother waited at the bottom of the steps, smiling nervously. The boy's eyes widened when he saw Rex. "Is that him?" he asked. "The dog from the papers?" Ethan nodded, kneeling beside the shepherd. "That's him. This is Rex." The boy approached carefully. Rex sniffed his hand, then let the boy rest his palm gently on his head. He's really calm," the boy whispered. "Yeah," Ethan said. "He's seen a lot. He's earned the calm." The boy hesitated, glancing up. "Does he ever stop watching?" Ethan smiled faintly, his hand brushing over Rex's head. "Only when the truth is safe." The boy seemed to think about that, then scribbled something quickly in his notebook. "I'm going to write about him for school," he said proudly. Grace chuckled. You'll have the best story in class. As the boy ran back to his mother, Ethan straightened up, watching them disappear down the gravel road. The sunlight glinted off the sign above the gate, Rex Haven, for those who guard the truth. Behind him, the house hummed with quiet energy. Volunteers worked in the archives, sorting new donations. A veteran named Paul played guitar in the common room while his service dog dozed at his feet. A young woman in a therapy session laughed for the first time in months. The house had once been haunted by lies. Now it was held together by honesty, by resilience, by the quiet bond between man and dog. Ethan walked to the edge of the porch, taking in the view, the valley stretching beyond the trees, the wind rippling through the grass, the faint hum of bees in the wildflowers. Rex followed and sat beside him, lowering his head onto Ethan's boot like he'd done 1,000 times before. You know, Ethan said softly, I used to think the world broke my father, that the truth was what killed him, but maybe it's the only thing that kept him alive. In here. He touched his chest. And in you. Rex turned his head slightly, eyes meeting his. A quiet understanding passed between them. Something beyond words, beyond time. Grace stepped onto the porch, camera hanging at her side. You ready for the dedication speech? She asked. Ethan glanced at her and smiled. I think Rex already gave it. That evening, when the crowd had left and the lamps glowed warm inside the mansion, Ethan sat with Grace on the porch steps. The night was cool, the kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones. Fireflies blinked across the yard. You ever think people will forget? Grace asked. Ethan looked toward the horizon, where the forest met the stars. Maybe someday, but not him. Rex shifted beside them, lifting his head toward the dark tree line. His ears twitched, eyes steady, still guarding, still listening. From the road below, a car passed, headlights sweeping briefly across the porch before fading away. The house stood firm, its windows glowing like beacons against the night. Ethan rose, stretching his back. Come on, old boy, let's get you inside. Rex didn't move right away. He stayed there, watching the woods as the wind whispered through the pines. Only when Ethan called his name again did he rise and follow, slow but proud. The camera panned back, across the porch, across the stone steps, across the wide field bathed in moonlight. The laughter of distant voices carried through the open windows. And there, framed against the light, the silhouette of an old shepherd stood watch one last time. The screen faded to black. Text appeared, simple and true. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. What's your story with a loyal pet? Then the final line appeared. A quiet invitation. A heartbeat shared between those who understand loyalty. Subscribe to German Shepherd Stories, where every bark tells a truth worth hearing.